You would have used a ghost train. Hey, everybody, the ghost train guy would have used a ghost train.
As a series, Rick and Morty hasn't exactly shied away from making fun of, or even directly referencing, basically anything related to science fiction or fantasy properties. I mean, the two title characters are basically caricatures of Doc Brown and Marty from Back to the Future. Referencing things is kind of a part of the show's very DNA. Of course, this also means that something as large as the Marvel Cinematic Universe has been made fun of at least once on the show. Actually, it's been referenced more than a few times, hence why I'm doing an entire list about it. In addition to an entire episode, which was just basically a big Marvel homage, which you just know that I'm gonna have to talk about, there have also been some smaller ones here or there. And since I love Rick and Morty, I figured I'd break down all the times this show has mocked Marvel. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and dive right into it.
So I thought, why not just do your job for you so we can have a little fun game?
Okay, so I'm gonna start this off with the episode that I mentioned there in the intro, since that is where most of the references lie. Don't worry though, we've got some smaller ones a little later on. So what episode am I talking about exactly? Well, the Vindicators one, naturally. Despite being called Vindicators 3, The Return of World Ender, the episode sees the first appearance of a super team known as the Vindicators, who are very obviously a riff on the idea of a bunch of superheroes coming together to form a team. Think Justice League, Defenders, or in this case, the Avengers. And if you think it's meant as just a generic superhero team instead of a direct reference to the Avengers, just peep their logo. Doesn't that look fairly familiar? Just flip it over and maybe add an extra line and boom, Avengers. Though, in fairness, that was kind of obvious to anyone who was paying even a little bit of attention. So how about we look at some of the less obvious connections? Vance Maximus, aka Renegade Star Soldier, is at first glance a reference to the MCU's penchant for presenting us with quick-witted, fast-talking leading men, such as Tony Stark, Stephen Strange, etc. But do you know who the character reminds me of the most? Peter Quill, aka Star-Lord. He has the same kind of bravado as the leader of the Guardians of the Galaxy, and his outfit isn't all too far off. Not to mention that he has basically the same abilities, being a non-superpowered, gun-toting kind of character. Admittedly though, Renegade Star Soldier is just a tad bit more on the sleazy side of things, being a bit more of a booze hound, and he is certainly a lot more smooth than Star-Lord ever has been. In fact, Quill probably wishes he was as dashing as Maximus appears to be. Another example of a character who is a member of the Vindicators who has a nearly direct counterpart on the Marvel side of things has to be Million Ants. Now just look at this guy. This is a man made entirely out of ants. He is a literal Ant-Man. So therefore, he is probably a riff on the founding member of the Avengers, the pint-sized hero Ant-Man. Though he could also be a reference to the lesser-known Marvel villain Swarm, who is a Spider-Man baddie who is entirely made up of a swarm of bees, which is a bit more terrifying than just a bunch of ants, all things considered. Now this does leave us with a pretty serious question though. What would happen if Million Ants went up against Ant-Man? Could Scott Lang or Hank Pym use their tech to control the ants that make up Million Ants' very being, literally ordering them to disperse before the fight could even really begin? You know, I think I need to know the answer to this. And since Marvel probably won't want to play nice with Adult Swim, I guess I'll just have to wait for the inevitable fanfiction to come out. Get on it, internet. At the beginning of the Vindicators episode, the team is briefed on this team-up's big bad, a monstrous being known as World Ender. This thing is described as a being that takes pleasure in only two things: committing genocide and destroying entire planets. Now that sounds like a fun dude to hang out with. He actually kind of sounds like the combination of two major Marvel villains. Of course, my mind immediately went to Thanos, the mad titan who sought to first end half the life in the universe, then eventually all of it by the climax of Endgame. And the other villain? Obviously the one that many people, including myself, thinks will be the next big bad evil guy of the MCU, Galactus, the Celestial with a taste for juicy, delicious planets. Tasty. Despite being a rather threatening combination, World Ender didn't seem to be a threat for Rick, however, who managed to take out the arch nemesis of the Vindicators while intoxicated beyond belief. Classic Rick. As I mentioned earlier, the Vindicators episode is named Vindicators 3, meaning that there was apparently 2 previous team-ups that we didn't see, though we did get to hear about them. The second adventure was talked about by the team, and they mentioned that the villain they went up against was a homicidal robot called Doomnometron. Now, guess what team's second movie sent them up against a robot bent on the destruction of the human race? Yeah, it was the Avengers. Specifically during their film Avengers Age of Ultron. Now, here's a funny little connection. Amongst MCU fans, Age of Ultron isn't exactly a fan favorite, often being a film that not a lot of people really want to talk about. Kind of like how the Vindicators don't like talking about their second adventure. Of course, that was due to having to wipe out an entire planet to ensure Doomnometron's destruction, but you know, close enough, I guess? Okay, so one last Vindicators related reference before we move on to the other jokes about Marvel that Rick and Morty has to offer. During the beginning of the Vindicators episode, Morty is trying to convince Rick to go take part in the Vindicators team up. As an offhand comment, Rick states that he thought the whole Vindicators thing was just a phase.
They're a phase. We did one. It was the big event of that summer. Let it die.
Now, if you're someone like me, who basically lives and breathes the Marvel Cinematic Universe, just hearing the word phase immediately gives you an eye twitch. It's the closest thing to a trigger word our fandom has. Phase, in the context of the MCU, refers to the different eras of the films, with each one usually ending with a major team-up film. Phase 1 ended in 2012 with the Avengers. Phase 2 technically ended after Ant-Man, but most people consider Age of Ultron the true end. Phase 3 came to a close with Spider-Man Far From Home, though Endgame was meant to be the end, until Sony insisted on releasing Far From Home so soon after Endgame had came out. So chalk that one up to studio politics. Total Recall is probably my favorite episode of the entire show. It's just so good, and it includes a small Marvel-based joke courtesy of one of the most hilariously named characters of all time. I'm not even sure if I can say his name on YouTube, so let's just go ahead and call him PBH. Anyways, in the episode, PBH reminded the Smith family of the time that they went with him to see a stage musical based upon The Incredible Hulk, which I actually kind of want to see now that you mention it. This was probably a joke about the somewhat badly received Spider-Man stage show, when you really dig into it. Either way, it's a pretty funny joke. The episode, Look Who's Purging Now, includes quite a few references to a popular bit of pop culture. But as far as I know, the Purge isn't a part of the MCU. Maybe. That would be kind of awesome though. Imagine the Hulk purging, or Iron Man. Okay, that last one, we actually don't really have to imagine too much, as this episode of Rick and Morty basically gives us just that. See, as stuff really starts to go down in the episode, Rick gets himself and Morty geared up in what is basically a pair of Iron Man suits. So yeah, no need to really imagine how it would go down, because it's right there for us already. The interdimensional Cable episodes gave us some of the weirdest characters on the show, which is really saying something, since there have been some pretty out there people introduced in just the regular episodes. One such character that came in the second interdimensional Cable was Octopus Man, a dude who appears to be half human, half octopus, as the name would suggest. At one point, he states that he was bitten by a radioactive octopus, which if I have to explain the connection to Marvel there, then you've not been paying much attention to the 35 different reboots of Spider-Man that we've gotten in the last 2 decades. Luckily, Peter Parker didn't wind up looking quite as grotesque as Octopus Man did. Also, this character could also be seen as a reference to one of Spider-Man's biggest and most well-known villains, Doc Ock. Sort of a hybrid of the two. Neat. In a few episodes of the show, we've been shown the Council of Ricks, a sort of ruling party made up of different versions of Rick from across the multiverse, which of course, our main Rick is not exactly a fan of. You know, authority and all that. This is actually fairly similar to something that we have seen within the Marvel Universe, namely the Interdimensional Council of Reeds, which was exactly what the name would lead you to believe. A massive council made up of many different versions of the Fantastic Four's Reed Richards, from across countless different dimensions. These Reeds had forsaken their own worlds, choosing to leave them behind in order to better help out the larger multiverse, becoming about as self-righteous as the Council of Ricks in Rick and Morty. Although this council has quite a bit of power to back up their attitudes, as many members of the Council of Reeds possess their universe's version of the Infinity Gauntlet or the Ultimate Nullifier. Though the Council of Ricks have a bunch of Ricks, so you know, maybe that's pretty even, power level wise.
Look, there's nothing in the room but us. I'm just using logic to connect some dots.
Were there any times that Rick and Morty referenced Marvel in the MCU that I missed? Be sure to let me know down in the comments below. I'll be hanging out down there for a little while after this video goes up. And hey, while you're down there, why not consider subscribing to the channel? It really helps us all out. Thanks for watching, and stay safe out there.